Well, hello, everybody. It is September 10th. Here we are, getting ready for IBM Tech Exchange. This is David Jeunesse, your host today. Okay, this is what we're doing today. Unleashing the power of story. We've got Melinda with us. But first, Susan and I want to welcome you. Susan Duvin is the face of Speaker Help. So if you ever send an email or ask for help, that's Susan who's doing that. She will be in the Speaker Ready room, which will be very near registration. So easy to find this year. It's big. All kinds of cool things are going to happen there. Make sure you stop by. You might even have some gifts for people, don't you, Susan? Or some little swag or something?
Absolutely. Yeah? We want everybody to stop by the Speaker Ready room. Can't wait to see you all in person.
I am also want to remind you that this is part two. We did part one a week ago. Gary Lafferty. These two pieces go very nicely together. So if you joined us last week, great. And if not, we've got a recording and it's all over the place. I'll make sure, actually, Susan has put it into the speaker portal so you can see that recording. And it goes nicely with this one. This is part of our speaker coaching program that is something we really enjoyed doing last year. It was our first year last year. And we've expanded it this year. We have more speakers than ever, more sessions than ever, and more speaker coaches than ever. And here is just a look at some of the on-site sessions that you can take while you're at TechXchange. Our special guest today, Melinda, has one. Scott Walker from Navy Federal is presenting. Gary Lafferty has a session. Glenn Anderson, a lot of the IBM Z folks remember Glenn well. He used to work in the Z area. He is a speaker coach now, professional speaker coach. He's doing several things. And then Fred and Mo, the Fred and Mo show. They've been doing this every year. This is a part of, they've been running Tech Exchange and all of the technology events that IBM has done for probably 20 years. They did it. So they're reprising it, and we're bringing Fred back to be part of it, which is fun. But also, last thing I want to tell you is that one of the new things we're doing this year is what we call a fine-tune session, where you take your laptop, you go to the Speaker Ready room, and you meet up with Melinda or Gary or Paul Cordalesi or Glenn Anderson, and in a 15-minute session, you do your opening or you do your closing. And Melinda or Gary, you can sign up on the catalog. Any of these speaker coaches are happy to just give you a little tweak. They're not going to say change anything in your deck. They might give you some little hint about how to open strong, a little hint about how to introduce yourself, or how to close strong. So do take advantage of that. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you, and Melinda's going to take a minute or two to set up her fancy screen here. So I'll take 15 seconds to say that I've worked with Melinda for probably 7 or 8 years. We did some amazing events at Think. We brought Broadway actors to Think. We put on a special show. We've done videos together, and we've worked together putting on automation events. And Melinda has been a great speaker coach in that capacity. So she's, well, a triple threat.
All right. So, thank you so much, David and Susan. It's always such a pleasure. I really love working with all of you. So today we're going to talk about unleashing the power of story. And so I thought, since this is the topic, that I should introduce myself through my story. So, once upon a time, I was a little girl with a big dream, and that dream eventually took me all the way to Broadway. And I had the extraordinary privilege of working with some of the greatest storytellers in American theater. I did a chorus line with Michael Bennett and Marvin Hamlish. I worked with Stephen Sondheim and Bob Fosse, and if you're looking, I'm the third from the right. And it was a remarkable, it's just unbelievable to be in the same room with some of these incredible creators. And then I went on and I wanted to do stand-up, try my own stories, and I worked all over the city. And then eventually wrote my own solo play, my own solo show, which I take around the country. So I'm sharing that because my whole life I've been, just passionate about story and all these different formats. So why am I here? Well, because throughout that time, throughout my career, I've also worked in all these corporate productions. And like David mentioned, we've done some fantastic, interesting things, bringing theater, bringing the elements of theater and storytelling into this environment. And I've worked for the past 20, 25 years with executives, helping them craft compelling narratives and then deliver engaging presentations. And what I find over and over again is that story transforms information into connection. So let's start with something that I think we can all relate to. There was a study where they found that the average American's number one fear was public speaking. And their number two fear was death. So death was number two. So I guess that means for that average American, if they go to a funeral, they would rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy. So that's a joke. And it's not mine, it's Jerry Seinfeld's. And just by chance, it's also in Gary Lafferty's amazing book. So great speaker coaches thinking alike. So I want to mention that right at the top, because if you're nervous, you're not alone. And when we get on site, I can share with you my many stories of having panic attacks on opening nights and things like that. So over the course of the years, I've developed all these different strategies to be able to sort of use that nervous energy to your advantage. So I'll be sharing a lot of that when we get on site. But the other reason that I like sharing a joke, or this joke, is because it illustrates this important point, I think, about structure. You see, joke telling is storytelling, right? In that you have to know your punchline. You have to know your ending. And everything from your first sentence to your last has to build towards this one singular goal. So everything, the setup, the pacing, the delivery, it's all intentional. That's what makes a great joke. That's what makes a great story. And presentations should work the same way. So everything that you show and say should build, and I use that word specifically, build towards one singular idea. And using narrative is the way that you transform information into connection. So, why does this matter now? Well, just a few months ago, I used to say we live in an attention economy, but I actually think we're in an attention crisis. Like the way we consume information, media, everything has changed so dramatically, even like in the past couple of years, right? So I think that attention has become our most valuable resource. So we have to be really intentional with how we use it. People don't just give it to you, right? You have to really earn it. So the other reason that this matters is because we no longer are looking for information because we have access to it everywhere, right? Multiple screens, 24/7. We can get any piece of information we need. So what people crave now is something that will transform that information into something bigger, right? Something they can use. And that's what story does. So today we're going to cover, how do you start with story? How do you incorporate story? Because, we always hear story, 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 but, how do you do it? And then how do you use your tools to support that story? And then finally, how to respect attention, like the currency that it is. So how do you begin? Oh, my question to all of you, and I want you to put your answers in the chat. How do you begin creating your presentations? Do you A, open PowerPoint, B, define your audience, C, define your goal, or D, make a cup of coffee? So we can all hum the Jeopardy thing. Go ahead and put your answers in the chat. Unfortunately, I can no longer see the chat, so I'm going to rely on David and Susan.
So far, lots of C's and a couple of D's.
Oh, there you go.
Lots of
I'm off of
C's.
the
Lots of
D's.
C's
Great.
and a couple of D's.
All right. Well, that is awesome because I was going to say if you started with, and if anyone said open PowerPoint, that would have been like, right? And if you did, I would say, repeat after me. My PowerPoint is not my presentation. My presentation is me and the story I'm telling. Great. So do not open PowerPoint, which is, I'm glad to see a lot of people here don't do it, but a lot of people do. And, it's tempting. Even myself, I want to start something and I want to start dropping slides, like, oh, yes, this. And you get to like 8, 10, 12, 14, and you start running out of steam, right? And that's because you just haven't taken the time to actually plot out and figure out the arc of your story. Now, the challenge with this is that your presentation then falls flat. And this is what we end up getting, right? Because you've invested all that time. So we know that we don't want this. And so here's a formula that I have found. I got 50, 25, 25. Now, this is a formula that I learned from a presidential speechwriter. And he said 50% of your time should be developing your ideas, right? Your researching, defining, refining, editing, like creating that arc that we're talking about, right? Then and only then do you go to PowerPoint and go, oh, how can I bring these ideas to life, right? That's when you visualize. And then the final 25% is you get up on your feet. And that's when you practice out loud and you work on your delivery and your pacing and your flow. Okay, so 50, 25, 25. So let's talk about that 50. How do you start to find your story? Well, begin with your why. You see, every presentation is a story. Every story is a journey, and every journey has a why. Why did Harry Potter have to get to Hogwarts? Why did Luke Skywalker have to meet with Yoda? Why do you have to make your presentation? And I'll go one step further. Why do you have to make it to this audience at this particular time? Now, the more specifically that you can answer those questions, the more engaging and resonant your presentation will be, because your why drives your message. Okay, it compels people to not only listen, but to care. And you see, that's the key. That's why storytelling isn't just a skill, it's a superpower. It can turn customers into super fans and ideas into whole movements. I mean, Gary had that great example in his presentation about Michael Jackson's jacket, the Thriller jacket, and how much it sold for just because it was connected to his story, right? So stories create this human connection. Now, I'm going to break down that why even bigger, because there's 3 whys. The first is, why does it matter to you? See, here's the bottom line. If you don't care, they don't care. Just as simple as that. So you have to dig deeper, right? And find out, what is your connection? Why does this topic matter to you? Now, is it your work? Is it your values, your past? I mean, what's the connection? Because finding that is what gives your message energy. Okay, so I worked with this acting teacher, Win Hanman. Has a terrific documentary about him on Netflix called It Takes a Lunatic. But anyway, everyone who's anyone studied with Win, and he was a fantastic teacher. Robert De Niro, Christopher Walken, Denzel Washington, Richard Gere, Asif Manvi. He was in my class. He's in that series Evil right now. Anyway, Win would talk all the time about how you had to have the fire in your belly. You have to find that connection to your passion, right? And he would also say that if it doesn't exist for you, it's not going to exist for them. Now, I wanted to kind of give you a couple of examples of how you can bring story into this particular why. So I just did this conference, and it was engineers, makers. It was a highly technical conference, and person after person after person introduced themselves with a slide that said where they went to school or who they work for and what their company values are and the mission. And yes, that's a kind of story. But these two women were doing a presentation on STEM and girls, right? They have an annual event to introduce girls to STEM and engineering. So the way that they introduced themselves was one woman talked about how she didn't really care for dolls. She enjoyed making things, and she showed like 3 photos of her and her dad in the garage, in his shop, and they were making things and tools, and it was like a home movie. It just made you like lean in because it was so endearing to see the relationship, to see that she was that kind of little girl. And the other woman introduced herself by sharing a photo of herself in high school, and told the story about wanting to take an engineering class because this really cute guy that she had a crush on was taking it. So what ended up happening, of course, is that he flunked out, and the teacher pulled her aside and said, you could make this a career. So that probably took less time than I'm explaining it now, but it was so endearing, and it was story, right? It like really made us lean in, and we understood immediately why they cared so much about the topic. So that's one way to incorporate story that's relatively easy. The next way is to examine why it matters to this audience. You have to hold a mirror up in your presentation so that the audience can see themselves in the problem you're trying to solve, in the challenges and the pain points, and then, of course, in the solution. But they have to see themselves in that story. So why are they here? What do they care about? Why does this matter to them? And what do they know? What do they not know? Are they novices? So you have to really do that homework, because that gives you clarity, and that clarity comes from empathy and curiosity about who they are. I often use this triangle, that there are 3 key points of a presentation. The top is the speaker, then you have the message, and then you have the audience. And what's the most important thing in this triangle? The audience. Actually, that they get the message, right? So that's your job. Now, you can bring story into this as well. When I was thinking about this, I was thinking, maybe I could come up with an idea. Like if you were addressing a bunch of developers and say you were talking about Gen AI, you could say something like, I believe the most valuable resource that any developer has is time, right? And it's, I've seen too many brilliant minds sidelined by, spending weeks on compliance reports and debugging marathons and, paperwork, drudgery. Anyway, you've seen too many minds sidelined by that. And so you're offering them a solution, right? In this case, like Gen AI Watson, right? And with this solution, we're able to give you back your time so you can focus on where your talents are, solving the hard problems, innovating, and creating real impact. So that's a little bit of an example of a story that you can create out of your audience's need. The third why is, why does it matter outside this room, right? What's the greater good? Now, that's something that I think always appeals to people. We want to be part of the greater impact, right? That's why so many technology presentations are about vision, how the world is going to be if we adopt this technology. And if you paint that picture clear enough, we want to be a part of it. Now, I saw a presentation this summer that was about redirecting lava flows in Iceland. Not something that I would, be drawn to, I would say, but the way it was presented, with the impact. Like they showed these incredible photos of like volcanoes with these lava flow fingers, and then they showed the town like in 1954 and then the town now, and how the lava flows are right. I mean, the town is right in the direct path. So they have to solve this problem. And that the way they presented it really gave that story urgency, right? So what's the urgency? What's the greater impact? If it's, AI in healthcare, I'm assuming that it's if doctors can get diagnoses quicker, then they can save lives, right? That's the greater impact. So that's part of your 50%. You want to spend time like digging through your whys, and then you want to find your big idea. So what's the one thing that you want them to remember and why? You see, that's your punchline. That's your through line. And just like I think Gary mentioned in his presentation, once you find that, you work backwards. You figure out like, okay, how do I set up the problem? How do I build towards that punchline, that one singular goal that we talked about earlier? So I like to think in terms of headlines, making it punchy. When you think of headlines, they're not acronyms and jargon. It's like short, accessible, memorable words. So make it matter, make it sticky, and make it specific. Now, I want to talk about structure because we talked about a couple of ways to, that you can incorporate story in your, find story in your whys. But another great way to bring story into your presentation is to adapt a storytelling structure, right? So, as I said earlier, a joke and a story, they're not that different. They both create tension. They both lead somewhere, right? And that's what your presentation needs. It needs a shape, a build, and a payoff, because nobody wants to be this guy. Oh. Well, actually, you do want that. Great stories build, great jokes land, and great presentations do both, right? But you need the payoff because you don't want to be this guy.
By the way, when you're telling these little stories, here's a good idea. Have a point. It makes it so much more interesting for the listener.
Right? I mean, I'm going to stop for one quick second and say, like, yes, we talked about stories and how they cut through and they appeal to the heart, but they also appeal to the human brain. You see, as soon as someone starts talking, you're like, where's it going? What's the problem? How can I solve it? Right? Watch next time you're in a conversation. We're trying to engage. We're trying to help because that's what we do, right? So our brains are programmed to do this, and our brains understand narrative structure. So what is a story? A story is a sequence of events with a beginning, a middle, and an end. In your beginning, we have the characters, right? The main character, the protagonist, which is you because you're presenting your presentation. But what's the setting? What's the problem you're trying to solve, and why is it so important to you? The next is the middle, right? Stakes, conflict, tension. We need tension and conflict because that's what keeps us engaged. And then finally, the climax, then the resolution, right? The climax is the turning point. That's when everything changes. And every story involves transformation. So that's your breakthrough, right? So let's look at a presentation structure. It's the same thing. Open, a body, and a resolution. So what do you need in your opening? You need to tell us who the main players are, what your role is, the setting, and what's the problem you're trying to solve, and why. Why is it important to you, this audience, to the world, right? Next is the stakes, the conflict, the tension. What are the pain points, the challenges? Every goal that we have meets resistance. So you want to bring that to life. That's what humanizes stories. And then finally, the resolution. This is, again, the turning point. And then your resolution is the call to action. What do you want your audience to do next? So I thought I would put this in a business presentation framework. This is an actual agenda from a conference I did this summer. Now, again, you wouldn't know it was technical except if you look at that photo, right? But there's no jargon, there's no anything in this. This is a pure story structure in his agenda. The struggle is real. Right away, we kind of get like, oh, he gets, if I'm in the audience, he gets my struggle. So then he identifies the problem we're solving. And within that, he's also identifying himself. And then the playbook. This is, the settings. This is how we get things done, right? And within that would be probably all the things they tried until they hit the climax, which is the secret sauce, right? And it's right there in there. This is what makes this a game changer, right? Transformation. And then the payoff, why it's worth the effort to them. But I think embedded in that is also the call to action, right? It's worth the effort for me. It's worth the effort for you. So I wanted to share a presentation that David shared with me. This was building AI-driven applications with Gen AI. So let's talk about this opening, right? I didn't see the presentation, but this was the first slide I saw. And I thought, wow, that's great. One picture worth 1,000 words really gave me the setting, right? This is what's going on. And then very quickly, they gave me the characters. Who are the characters? This is probably, these are the people in the audience or the characters that are involved in this, experiencing the problem, right? The AI engineer, and then there's two different kinds. And what's the problem that they're trying to solve? Everyone wants Gen AI, but few know how to harness it, right? So, boom. All right, if I know what the story is about, I'm on board, and I want to help you solve this problem. The next we get to the body. This is where the stakes, the conflict, the tension is, right? Now you need to have stakes, right? If there's no stakes, there's no reward. There's nothing really going to keep me engaged. But in these presentations, I looked at another one called Building Your First Gen AI the Right Way. Lots of stakes, unreliable outputs, increased costs, integration issues, maintenance challenges, inaccuracies, and security risks. You could bring those to life with short, quick stories, and I always like to say you want to build your obstacles, right? So the first one is like, okay, a challenge. The second one, bigger challenge. The third one, really big, right? And within the biggest challenge is also the aha moment, the breakthrough, right? And that's your call to action. Well, that's the aha moment, the game-changing moment. And then within that is your call to action, right? So this is just a simple way to apply a storytelling structure to a business presentation. Give us the problem, the main characters, the setting up front. If we know what the problem is, it's like, okay, I'm on board. I'm rooting for you. Then the playbook. Oh, what did you do? You tried this. We tried to get the integration issues. So we did this, and nothing was working until, boom, the breakthrough, right? The secret sauce, the game changer, right? And then, of course, the payoff. This is the solution. This is how we transform the problem, and you can too, right? So I just wanted to recap it in sort of business terms, but story structure. So now we covered that. I want to quickly talk about some things that will enhance your story, right? And the first tip is start strong. Your opening line should demand attention, right? Maybe it's, well, I will always share with this is Simon Sinek, and this was his opening line. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. This is me being sneaky and getting my why back in there because the why is so important. right? But here's the other thing. There's a Buddhist concept called consistency from beginning to end. So how you start sets the stage for how you finish, right? And I will tell you from my old stand-up days that if you lose somebody in the beginning, right, by being too unspecific or whatever, you're going to be working so hard through the whole presentation to get them back. So it's much easier to grab them in the beginning than to fight to get them back. And this is one way to do it. Another way is what I like to call the snag and reel. Remember I talked about how we're problem solvers, right? Well, the other thing too is that people need resolution. So if you start with an unanswered question, audience will stay with you until they get the answer, right? So Tim Ferriss does this a lot. He always opens his presentations with, what if you could have it all? Or what if you could work 4 hours a week and still get everything you need to do done? Provocative, right? And I would say that you can do that in your opening. You could have a provocative question in your opening, but you can do it any time in your presentation. Like maybe it's a great way to transition. You know, the thing with questions is that it makes us, we set up. You ask me a question, even if it's rhetorical, right? I look to great playwrights, right? Like Hamlet. In the middle of the play, great question. To be or not to be? That is the question. Just drops it in the middle and then we're off, right? The other example of this is, you know, any series that you watch on Netflix. You know, if you've ever sat down at 11 o'clock and then all of a sudden it's 4 o'clock in the morning because you just have to know, right? They've mastered this, but you can too. And now my third tip, well, I just wanted you to take a look at this picture and tell me what you think it is. You can put it in the chat. I know a couple of people said rug, paper. Well, I'm not going to torture you. This is actually, if you've ever been to the Chicago Art Institute, there is a very famous painting by George Seurat. And he is a painter that created or pioneered pointillistic painting. In other words, he doesn't use brush strokes. He uses dots, right? All his entire painting is made up of little teeny tiny dots. Now, I use this as a metaphor because there is this ever-present danger when we've mastered a subject that we get so steeped in the details that we lose perspective. We get caught up in the dots. But to your audience, the dots doesn't tell the story, right? So you need to provide context. And how do you do that? By pulling back. Because we need the big picture to understand how all those dots are connected. This is the full painting of Sunday in the Park with George, right? Now, you wouldn't know. I mean, the dots make the painting, but we only understand it when you pull back and show us the big picture. Okay, and now it's time for a little commercial break. This doesn't have anything to do with story, but it does have to do with being prepared on site. And since you're going to be packing and everything, I wanted to just kind of plant the seeds. First of all, you probably know this. Ballrooms are cold. Bring a wrap, a sweatshirt, something. You just want to make sure that you're prepared. The next thing is there's a lot of walking, so comfortable shoes. You need to have comfortable shoes, even if you have to change out of them from time to time. And the third thing, which is so important, is protect your voice. I mean, this is the instrument that's carrying your message, right? So you need to take care of it. So hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. The best thing for your vocal cords is hydration. Another thing you can do is spend an extra few minutes in the shower in the steam. Steam is wonderful for your cords. A lot of people, there's a lot of talking and networking going on, and they start to lose their voice, and they do tea with lemon, which is the worst thing that you can do for your voice. Regular tea is very dehydrating, and lemon is acidic, so it's not actually helping you. But this tea, which you can find in CVS and everywhere, throat coat, is amazing. It's got slippery elm, and it's just a great thing. I keep it in my water bottle. I just have it with me all the time. And here's another thing which you can get on Amazon, Entertainer's Secret. Now, this is what everybody uses on Broadway when they're doing 8 shows a week. You know, your voice gets tired. A couple of spritzes, it really, really helps. Okay, get all that stuff on Amazon if you need. And now, back to our regular programming. Talked about story, structure, arc, shape, build, payoff. Now is the time to turn to bringing your story to life. Now, we've all seen compelling visualizations, but we've also seen the opposite. And that's because, you know, you're good people and you want to give so much. So we put every word and every statistic that we think is important all onto one slide. But honestly, it's the easiest way to lose an audience, right? There's a great book called Slideology. And in that book, she says, if it's more than 75 words, it's not a slide, it's a document. Okay? So here's the thing. Live presentations are for big ideas. Print is for detail. So, slides are for fast visual comprehension, right? You want to get it right away, which is what's great about this particular image, right? It's intriguing. It kind of draws you in. Now, this is an image, again, from building Gen AI the right way the first time, which was the most attended presentation of the whole conference, right? So it's a great presentation. And this was a fantastic metaphor because she's talking about predicting words, and she's using this metaphor of a detective novel, right? Fantastic concept to get this idea across. But unfortunately, 94 words. Now, I'm sure it was great. It was the most well-attended, presentation. So I'm sure it was fantastic. And this didn't hurt it. But if I would, I do want to help you. So I would say you can limit that. And cognitive science backs me up. See, because the brain cannot read and listen at the same time. It's like physically impossible. And because, as I say, we're problem solvers, if we're given a choice, we're going to read. Because the eye is quicker than the ear, right? So you don't want your audience reading your slide, getting ahead of you, off on their own tangent because of something that they read. When that happens, you've lost control of the message, right? So again, think bold, think statement, think billboards. And I like to use this actual billboard to illustrate this point. This was a real billboard from when Denver was going through a drought. And this is what they did. And I love this because there's not even any backing to the words. It's just use only what you need. It's just a perfect message. So I think it's also a perfect rule for when you're presenting slides. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is showing one thing at a time. That will help you keep things minimal. Now, here's the thing. We don't talk in paragraphs, right? We talk in moments. So your slides should match that rhythm. Now, if you've noticed, I like to use a lot of metaphors, and I particularly like the musical metaphor because it works on a number of things, like there's rhythm to our speech, right? The other thing is, if you look at a musical composition, the composer has written notes, but they've also written rests. These are programmed moments of silence. And they do that for a specific reason, because it's like It adds space, right? And it's the same thing when you're presenting. A pause, it adds weight to what you're saying. It tells the audience this is important. And it also gets our attention, right? We get so afraid of silence, like we just become like this wall of words. It's like, I do it too. You get nervous and you just talk a lot. And when you're on stage, of course, you've got the nerves going and things, but try to program it into your presentation, moments that you want to draw focus to, where you take a breath, sip of water. It gives the audience, not necessarily a sip of water, but a pause gives the audience a moment to sort of absorb what you just said. And like I said about attention earlier, it gets our attention. It's like if you're a mom and there's kids like playing in the other room and they've been playing and playing and playing loud, 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 and then all of a sudden it gets quiet. You're like, uh-oh, right? That's what it does. So find those places you can use your pauses. Now, here's another, I wouldn't say it's a design rule, but it's a great guardrail. Again, you want to do one idea per slide. You also want to do a maximum of 6 bullets, a maximum of 6 words per bullet. And do what I do. Try to animate as you speak because it keeps the audience with you and it's a much more kind of immersive experience. So here's an example from building AI-driven applications with Gen AI. Nice and clean, right? We get it. The words are not terribly, they're not terribly tricky. So quick visual comprehension. All right, let's talk quickly about charts and graphs. So it's really the same concept, right? So here we go. This is, we've all seen this chart. Different versions of it. It's just overloaded. People are trying to show too much, or they put it up and they talk for 15 minutes, and we're supposed to know where they are on the chart. It's just, if we have to study it, it's not working. All right. So you want to use a laser pointer, text animations, just want to keep us immersed in your experience. Because people, they'll throw a chart up like this and they'll think it's data storytelling. So I want to quickly just sort of address that. What is data storytelling? Well, it's not that, right? Data storytelling is finding a foundational insight, then creating a story around it, and then visualizing that. So what does that look like? Here's a chart with data. It's not even as busy as the one that we saw before, but it's all right. I do have to look at it to kind of figure out what's going on. There are 10 metrics and 3 trend lines, and basically I know something's going up, right? Okay. So you've just lost me as an audience member if I'm spending that much time trying to figure it out. This is a chart that's cleaned up, right? It's one simple bar chart and a headline. And it tells us everything we need to know. It's the same data, but now there's a story. Here's the problem we were trying to solve. Here's what we did. Here's the result. And here's why it mattered. Right? Story. All right, quickly want to touch on supporting live demos. Now, here's the thing with a demo. It's already visual, right? So many times I've seen people use slides that are mirroring the demo, and you don't need to do that. What your slides should do is guide us, right? So use slides to frame what we're seeing, but keep it very minimal. And speaking of minimal, editing, right? This is a great way to respect your audience's attention, right? Being concise, really, if a great joke is a distillation of a story, a great presentation is the same thing. It's a distillation. So I'm going to talk about this, this another metaphor. I want to talk about this sculpture because It's Teddy Roosevelt, right? And Teddy Roosevelt wore glasses, but what you see here is just the tiniest hint of a frame, right? He didn't put he didn't put everything. He wore glasses. He wasn't so literal that he put the entire glasses on. So that's a great example to me of making something powerful by leaving something out. Because see, every element you remove sharpens what's left behind, right? So think of editing not so much as an afterthought, but as a design principle. So now I want to say more about it, but I want to be conscious of your attention. And that brings us back to where we started, right? It is an attention economy. Nobody wants to present to this woman in the middle, and it's just all too easy. We have these things in our pockets and, in our watches, but if you really consider the fact that you're not just sharing content, you are spending someone's most valuable resource. So be as intentional as you can be, because it's a big responsibility, but it's also an awesome opportunity, right? Because now you can authentically engage and connect. Remember, information is everywhere. What's scarce and really powerful is authentic connection. And that doesn't happen through data dumps and lists and jargon and acronyms. It happens through narrative, because stories, as I said earlier, are how we make sense of the world and how we remember what really matters. So I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you on site. I do want to remind you that if anything here has like, oh, I should change this slide, I think you can do that. You can go to speakerhelp@ibm.com and you can make some changes. They'll help you, they'll guide you through the whole process. So thank you so much.